Secrets hidden in plain sight, power unchecked, lurking in the shadows, and one ordinary boy caught in the middle of it all. This is the Apex Conspiracy, a story of betrayal, survival, and the fight to expose the truth. What would you do if everything you thought you knew was a lie? When a single decision could shatter your world or save it? Stay tuned, because this journey will take you to the edge of trust and deception. The stakes? Higher than you could ever imagine. And the ending? Let's just say you'll never see it coming. The fading light of the late afternoon bathed the narrow alley in shades of orange and gray. Jake Miller, a lanky 16-year-old with a mop of unkempt brown hair, adjusted the strap of his worn backpack as he trudged home from school. His sneakers scuffed against the cracked pavement, echoing faintly in the stillness. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the distant hum of cars and the occasional bark of a dog. Jake's thoughts churned as he walked. His mom had called him earlier, her voice heavy with worry. Another notice from the landlord, another reminder of how precarious their situation was. Jake clenched his fists in frustration. No matter how many hours his mom worked, it never seemed to be enough. Lost in thought, Jake almost didn't see it. A black leather suitcase sitting in the middle of the alley just a few feet ahead. He stopped abruptly, his sneakers skidding slightly on the pavement. "What the?" Jake muttered under his breath. The suitcase looked out of place, too pristine for this rundown alley. The leather gleamed faintly, the edges stitched with precision. It was the kind of thing Jake had only seen in movies, carried by men in sharp suits. He glanced around, half expecting someone to step out of the shadows and claim it. The alley remained empty. Cautiously, Jake approached the suitcase. His heart thumped loudly in his chest. He crouched down, his fingers hovering over the silver latch. For a moment, he hesitated. This could belong to someone, he reasoned aloud, though his voice was barely more than a whisper. But then curiosity won. He flicked the latch open with a faint click. Inside, stacks of money greeted him, neatly bundled and secured with rubber bands. Jake's breath hitched. His mind raced, struggling to process what he was seeing. There had to be tens of thousands of dollars here. Maybe more. "No way," Jake whispered, his voice tinged with disbelief. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the crisp bills. They felt real. Too real. His gaze darted around the alley again. Still no sign of anyone. His initial excitement gave way to a growing sense of unease. This kind of money didn't just appear out of nowhere. Jake's instinct screamed at him to shut the suitcase and leave it there, but another voice, the voice of desperation, whispered louder. This could solve everything. The rent, mom's stress, all of it. As his fingers closed the suitcase, something caught his eye, a small white card tucked between the stacks of cash. He pulled it out, his brow furrowing as he read the message scrawled in neat, black handwriting. "Be careful. This money is a trap." Jake's stomach dropped. His pulse quickened as his eyes darted back to the suitcase. A trap? What kind of trap? Questions buzzed in his mind, each one louder than the last. Was someone watching him? Was this some kind of setup? The sound of footsteps broke the silence, faint but distinct. Jake's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the alley. Shadows shifted at the far end. Someone was coming. Panic surged through him. Without thinking, he snapped the suitcase shut and stood, clutching it tightly. His heart pounded as the footsteps grew louder. Whoever it was, they were close now. Too close. Jake backed away, his sneakers scraping against the pavement. He turned and bolted, the weight of the suitcase throwing off his balance. The alley blurred around him as he sprinted, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He didn't dare look back. When he finally reached his block, Jake slowed, gasping for breath. His lungs burned, and his legs felt like lead. The suitcase was still in his grip, the handle slick with sweat. He ducked into his apartment building, glancing over his shoulder one last time before slipping inside. The familiar scent of mildew greeted him as he climbed the stairs to their cramped second-floor apartment. The peeling wallpaper and flickering light in the hallway seemed almost comforting now. He unlocked the door with trembling hands and stepped inside, locking it behind him. The apartment was quiet. His mom wouldn't be home for another few hours. Jake set the suitcase on the small kitchen table and sank into a chair. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Fear, excitement, guilt. He opened the suitcase again, his gaze fixating on the stacks of cash. The card's warning echoed in his mind. This money is a trap. But what kind of trap? Was it marked? Was someone already tracking him? Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. He pulled it out and saw a text from his mom. "Hey, sweetheart. Working late tonight. There's leftovers in the fridge. Love you." Jake stared at the screen, his chest tightening. He looked back at the suitcase. If he kept the money, he could help her, pay off the rent, make life easier. But the warning nagged at him. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the apartment. Jake froze, the phone slipping from his hands. His heart raced as the knock came again, louder this time. Jake Miller. A deep voice called from the other side of the door. "We know you have it. Open up." Jake's breath caught. They knew. Whoever they were, they knew. He grabbed the suitcase and looked around the small apartment, searching for a place to hide. The knock came again, followed by a heavy thud as the doorframe shook. "Jake," the voice warned, now tinged with impatience. "This is your last chance." Jake's mind raced. He had to make a decision, now. The screen fades to black. The heavy knocks reverberated through the thin walls of the apartment, each one louder than the last. Jake's chest felt like it was going to explode as he clutched the suitcase tighter, his mind scrambling for a plan. His eyes darted toward the window above the kitchen sink. Second floor. He could make the jump right. Jake Miller. The voice outside the door growled, now sharper and more commanding. "We're not here to play games. Open the door." Jake glanced at the suitcase, his mind racing. Was this really worth it? The stacks of money inside suddenly felt more like a curse than salvation. The door frame groaned under another powerful thud. Jake made his decision. Without hesitation, he darted to the window, pushing it open with trembling hands. The humid night air spilled into the apartment as he looked down at the alley below. It wasn't as high as he'd feared, but the pavement looked unforgiving. The door cracked under another hit. Splinters rained onto the floor. Jake hoisted himself onto the windowsill, the suitcase wedged awkwardly under one arm. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, but the next deafening crash sent him over the edge. He hit the ground hard, the impact jolting up his legs and into his back. Pain shot through his left knee, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He clutched the suitcase and limped toward the main street. Behind him, the apartment door finally gave way, slamming open with a force that echoed down the alley. Jake didn't look back. The streets were quiet, illuminated only by dim streetlights and the flickering neon of a 24-hour laundromat. Jake ducked behind a parked car, his chest heaving. He could hear them, whoever they were, moving through the apartment above, their heavy boots thudding across the floor. "Find him," one of the voices barked. Jake's fingers tightened around the suitcase handle. He needed to think, needed a plan, but his thoughts were scattered, a chaotic jumble of fear and instinct. Then his phone buzzed. The sound seemed deafening in the stillness of the street. He fumbled to silence it, but not before the glow of the screen gave away his position. A sharp voice called out behind him. "There!" Jake's heart leapt into his throat. He bolted, his injured knee protesting with every step. The suitcase felt heavier with each stride, the weight dragging him down. Footsteps thundered behind him, closing the gap. He turned a corner sharply, nearly colliding with a trash can. The streets blurred around him, his vision narrowing as panic took over. He spotted an open gate leading to another alley and slipped through it, the chain-link fence rattling as he passed. For a moment, the footsteps faded. Jake pressed his back against the cool brick wall, trying to steady his breathing. He clutched the suitcase to his chest, sweat dripping from his brow. His phone buzzed again, but this time he checked it. Unknown number. Stop running. You're making it worse. Jake stared at the message, his blood turning cold. He swiped to his call log, intending to dial the police but hesitated. The voice on the other side of his door had sounded official, almost like law enforcement. If this was a setup, who could he trust? The alley was silent now, save for the distant hum of traffic. Jake forced himself to move again, hobbling toward the far end of the alley. It opened into a small park, the swing swaying gently in the night breeze. He dropped onto a bench, every muscle in his body aching. He stared at the suitcase, his mind replaying the note inside. Be careful. This money is a trap. Whoever wrote that wasn't kidding. The phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. You need to listen. Call this number. Now. Attached was a phone number. Jake's thumb hovered over the screen. He didn't trust this. But what choice did he have? Whoever had stormed into his apartment wasn't going to stop, and he was running out of places to hide. With a deep breath, he dialed. The phone rang once, twice, before a woman's voice answered. Jake, she said, her tone urgent but calm. You're in serious danger. Who are you? Jake demanded, his voice shaking. What do you want from me? My name is Ellie, the woman replied. I'm trying to help you, but you have to trust me. Trust you? Jake scoffed. I don't even know who you are. And why do you know my name? Because you made the mistake of picking up that suitcase, Ellie said, her voice sharp. And now they're after you. Who's they? Jake pressed. The people who own that money. Dangerous people who don't care what happens to you as long as they get it back. Jake's grip on the phone tightened. Why should I believe you? For all I know, you're one of them. If I were one of them, you wouldn't be on this call right now, Ellie shot back. Jake, listen to me. You need to get rid of the suitcase. What? Jake exclaimed, his voice rising. Do you have any idea what this money could do for me and my mom? We could finally. They don't care about you or your mom. Ellie interrupted. That money is marked. They can track it, and if they catch you with it, you're as good as dead. Jake's breath caught. His mind raced, torn between desperation and fear. He looked at the suitcase, the bundles of cash hidden inside. It had felt like a lifeline, but now it was starting to feel more like a noose. Where do I go? He asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sending you an address, Ellie said. Get there as fast as you can. And Jake, don't trust anyone else. The line went dead. Moments later, his phone buzzed with a new message, an address on the outskirts of the city. Jake didn't recognize it, but the sense of urgency in Ellie's voice pushed him to move. He stood, clutching the suitcase as he limped toward the nearest bus stop. The streets were eerily quiet as he waited, every shadow seeming to shift and move. When the bus finally arrived, Jake climbed aboard, collapsing into a seat near the back. As the bus rumbled through the city, Jake's mind raced. Who was Ellie? Could he trust her? And what would he find at that address? The lights of the city faded into darkness as the bus headed toward the outskirts. Jake stared at his reflection in the window, his own face looking back at him, pale and filled with doubt. His phone buzzed again. Another message. Unknown number. They're closer than you think. Jake's heart sank as he realized the message wasn't from Ellie. The bus stopped and two men in dark suits stepped on. They scanned the passengers, their eyes locking onto Jake. End of the line, one of them said, his voice cold. Jake froze, the suitcase gripped tightly in his lap. To be continued. The low hum of the bus engine did nothing to mask the sound of Jake's thudding heartbeat. The two men who had just stepped onto the bus looked like they belonged in a corporate office, not chasing a teenager through the city at night. Dark suits, polished shoes, and steely gazes made it clear they weren't here by coincidence. End of the line, the taller man repeated, his sharp eyes boring into Jake as he took a slow step forward. Jake's fingers tightened around the suitcase handle. his palms slick with sweat. He glanced at the exit doors just behind him. They were closed, but a quick press of the lever would open them. His mind raced, weighing his options. "Kid," the shorter man said, his voice deceptively calm. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Just hand over the suitcase." The other passengers watched in awkward silence, some glancing nervously at the suited men, others pretending not to notice the standoff. No one moved to help. Jake forced himself to speak, though his voice wavered. "I don't know what you're talking about." The taller man scoffed, a cold smile curling his lips. "Wrong answer." In a flash, Jake stood, clutching the suitcase tightly as he darted toward the exit doors. His shoulder slammed against the lever, and the doors hissed open just enough for him to squeeze through. He hit the pavement running, his knees screaming in protest. "Get him," one of the men barked. Jake didn't look back. His legs burned as he sprinted down the dimly lit street, his mind clouded with panic. He spotted a narrow alley up ahead and ducked into it, his shoes splashing through puddles as he tried to put distance between himself and his pursuers. The sound of their footsteps echoed behind him, growing louder with each passing second. "Stop running, kid." Jake's chest heaved, his breath ragged as he glanced over his shoulder. The taller man was gaining on him, his long strides eating up the distance. Jake's foot caught on a loose piece of debris, and he stumbled, nearly losing his grip on the suitcase. He turned a corner sharply, only to find himself at a dead end. A high chain-link fence loomed before him, topped with rusty barbed wire. Panic surged through him as he spun around, searching for another escape route. The two men entered the alley, blocking his only way out. "Well, that was pointless," the shorter man said, adjusting his tie with a smirk. "Just give us the suitcase, and we can all walk away from this." Jake's back pressed against the fence as he clutched the suitcase to his chest. "Why do you want it so badly? What's in it?" The taller man chuckled, his voice dripping with condescension. "You really don't know what you're holding, do you?" "I know it's money," Jake shot back, though his voice cracked. The shorter man sighed. "It's not just money, kid. It's leverage, power, and you're too young and stupid to understand what that means. Now, hand it over before this gets ugly." Jake's mind raced. He had no intention of giving up the suitcase, not until he knew what was really going on. His fingers brushed against the latch. "Don't even think about it," the taller man warned, his tone deadly serious. Before Jake could respond, the sound of screeching tires filled the air. Bright headlights flooded the alley as a sleek black SUV skidded to a stop at the entrance. The doors swung open, and two more figures emerged. One of them a woman with short, dark hair and a commanding presence. "Ellie," Jake whispered, recognizing her from the voice on the phone. "Get away from him," Ellie shouted, pulling a weapon from her belt and aiming it at the suited man. The taller man cursed under his breath. "You're making a mistake, Ellie." "No, the mistake was thinking you'd get to him first," she retorted. "Jake, come with me. Now!" Jake hesitated, his gaze darting between Ellie and the suited man. The shorter man took a step forward, his hands raised in mock surrender. "Don't listen to her, kid. She's not who you think she is," he said smoothly. "She's using you just like everyone else. Give us the suitcase and we'll protect you." "Shut up," Ellie barked, her weapon unwavering. "Jake, I'm not gonna ask again. Let's go." Jake's head swam with conflicting thoughts. He didn't trust Ellie, but the men in suits radiated menace. He made his choice. Clutching the suitcase, he ran toward Ellie and the waiting SUV. She grabbed his arm and practically shoved him into the back seat before climbing in herself. "Go, go, go!" Ellie yelled to the driver. The SUV roared to life, tires screeching as it sped away. Jake watched through the rear window as the suited men grew smaller in the distance, their shouts drowned out by the rush of wind. Inside the vehicle, Jake finally allowed himself to breathe. His hands trembled as he set the suitcase on the seat beside him. "Who are those guys?" he asked, his voice shaky. People you don't want to mess with, Ellie replied, her eyes scanning the road ahead. But you're lucky they didn't catch you. If they had, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Jake frowned. And what about you? Why should I trust you? Ellie sighed, glancing back at him. Because I'm the only person standing between you and them. That's not an answer, Jake pressed. Ellie hesitated before responding. The people after you work for an organization called Apex. They're powerful, dangerous, and very good at cleaning up their messes. That suitcase you're carrying, it's part of something much bigger. And now that you've got it, you're a target. Jake's stomach churned. Then why don't I just give it back? Ellie shook her head. It's not that simple. Apex doesn't leave loose ends. Even if you handed it over, they'd find a way to silence you for good. Jake leaned back, his head spinning. Great. So, what am I supposed to do now? You stay with me, Ellie said firmly. I'll keep you safe, but you have to follow my instructions. No questions, no arguments. Got it. Jake wanted to argue, to demand answers, but he knew she was right. He didn't have any other options. Fine, he muttered. Ellie nodded, her expression softening slightly. Good. We'll figure this out, Jake. I promise. The SUV slowed as they approached a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Ellie motioned for Jake to follow her as they exited the vehicle. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit, its walls lined with shelves of unmarked crates. Ellie led Jake to a small room in the back, where a table and 2 chairs waited. She gestured for him to sit. Now, she said, her tone serious. Let's talk about what's really in that suitcase. Cliffhanger. Before Jake could respond, the warehouse lights flickered. The sound of engines roaring outside sent a chill down his spine. Ellie's hand went to her weapon as she whispered, "They've found us." To be continued. The warehouse was plunged into eerie silence, broken only by the distant growl of engines. Jake sat frozen in his chair, clutching the suitcase as Ellie's sharp whisper cut through the darkness. They're here. Ellie moved with practiced efficiency, shutting off the overhead light and gesturing for Jake to stay low. Her hand hovered over the holster at her hip as her eyes scanned the room. "Stay behind me," she ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. "What do we do?" Jake whispered, his voice trembling. Ellie motioned for him to move toward a door at the far end of the room. "We leave. Quietly. If they find us, we're done." Jake's heart pounded as they crept toward the exit. The warehouse's vast interior seemed to amplify every small sound. The scuff of a shoe, the creak of a floorboard. Ellie led the way, her movements deliberate and silent. Jake followed close behind, clutching the suitcase tightly. As they reached the door, a loud crash echoed through the building. Jake flinched, his breath hitching as heavy footsteps reverberated against the concrete floor. There inside, Ellie muttered under her breath. She glanced at Jake, her expression steely. "When I say run, you run. Don't stop, don't look back." "Got it," Jake nodded, though every instinct screamed at him to do the opposite. Ellie cracked the door open, peering outside. The alley behind the warehouse was dark, lit only by a flickering streetlight. She motioned for Jake to follow as she stepped out into the night. "Go," she hissed. Jake bolted, his sneakers slapping against the pavement. The suitcase felt impossibly heavy in his grip, but he didn't dare let go. Ellie followed close behind, her eyes darting around as they ran. They didn't get far. A black SUV screeched around the corner, cutting off their path. 2 men stepped out, each armed and moving with cold precision. End of the road, one of them called, his weapon trained on Ellie. Jake's stomach twisted as Ellie stepped in front of him, shielding him with her body. She raised her hand slowly, her expression calm but calculating. "Let the kid go," she said, her voice steady. "He doesn't know anything." The man laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Nice try. We're taking both of you and the suitcase." Ellie didn't respond. Instead, Her hand shot to her holster. A single shot rang out, shattering the tension. One of the men dropped to the ground, his weapon clattering beside him. "Run!" Ellie shouted, shoving Jake toward a side street. He didn't need to be told twice. Jake sprinted, his legs burning as he weaved through the maze of alleys. Behind him, he could hear the chaos of shouting and gunfire, Ellie's voice cutting through the din. He turned a corner and skidded to a stop. Another SUV was parked at the end of the alley, its headlights blinding him. A figure stepped out, a tall man in a gray suit with a calm, almost bored expression. "Hello, Jake," the man said, his voice smooth. Jake's grip tightened on the suitcase. "Who are you?" The man smiled faintly. "Someone who can make your life much easier. But first, you'll need to give me what's mine." Jake's gaze darted around, searching for an escape. The man sighed, as if disappointed. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said. "You're in over your head, kid. Just hand over the suitcase, and we can both walk away from this." Jake's instinct screamed not to trust him. "What's in it? Why is it so important?" The man chuckled, shaking his head. "Curiosity killed the cat, Jake. But since you're so eager to know, that suitcase contains evidence. Evidence that could ruin some very powerful people. And those people, they don't like loose ends." Jake's stomach churned. "Then why don't you just destroy it?" The man's smile faded. "Because it's not that simple. Now, give it to me, or I'll make you regret it." Before Jake could respond, Ellie's voice cut through the darkness. "Step away from him." The man turned slowly, his expression unreadable as Ellie stepped into view. She held her weapon steady, her eyes locked on him. "Ah, Ellie," the man said, his tone almost amused. "I was wondering when you'd show up." "Jake," Ellie said sharply, ignoring him. "Get behind me." Jake didn't hesitate. He moved quickly, positioning himself behind Ellie as she faced off with the man. "Still playing the hero, I see," the man said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You can't protect him forever." "I don't need to," Ellie retorted. "I just need to protect him long enough." The man raised an eyebrow. "Long enough for what?" Ellie didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pressed a small button on a device Jake hadn't noticed before. A faint beeping sound filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. The man's expression darkened. "You've got to be kidding me." "Let's see how your friends handle a little surprise," Ellie said, a smirk tugging at her lips. Jake didn't have time to process what was happening. Ellie grabbed his arm, pulling him toward another side street as a deafening explosion rocked the alley behind them. He stumbled, nearly dropping the suitcase as smoke and debris filled the air. They didn't stop running until they reached the edge of the city, where a lone sedan was parked under a dim streetlight. Ellie opened the passenger door and practically shoved Jake inside before climbing into the driver's seat. As the car roared to life, Jake turned to her, his voice shaking. "What the hell was that?" "Insurance," Ellie replied, her eyes fixed on the road. "Insurance," Jake echoed, incredulous. "You just blew up a car." Ellie glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "It was either that or let them take us. Trust me, they'll recover. Apex always does." Jake stared at her, his mind racing. "Who are you really? And why are you helping me?" Ellie sighed, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "I used to work for Apex. I know how they operate, how far they'll go to protect their secrets. I couldn't be a part of it anymore, so I left. Now, I help people like you, people who get caught in their web." Jake frowned, her words sinking in. "And what happens now? They're not going to stop coming after me." "No," Ellie admitted, "but we have something they want. That gives us leverage. And if we play this right, we might just survive." The car sped through the empty streets, the city lights fading into the distance. Jake looked down at the suitcase in his lap, his thoughts a whirlwind of fear and confusion. "What's the plan?" he asked finally. Ellie's jaw tightened. You're going to help me take them down. Cliffhanger. Before Jake could respond, his phone buzzed with a new message. He hesitated before checking it, his heart sinking as he read the words. You're running out of time, Jake. We're closer than you think. To be continued. The sedan sped along the desolate highway, the dim glow of the city lights fading in the rear-view mirror. Jake sat rigid in the passenger seat, his eyes darting between Ellie's stoic profile and the ominous message on his phone. You're running out of time, Jake. We're closer than you think. He clenched the phone tightly, feeling the weight of the words pressed down on him. Ellie, he said, his voice trembling. They just sent me another message. They're still tracking us. Ellie's grip on the steering wheel tightened, her knuckles turning white. Of course they are. Apex has resources you can't imagine. Satellites, informants, trackers. Jake's stomach twisted. So, what do we do? How do we stop them? Ellie glanced at him, her expression calm but serious. We don't stop them, not yet. First, we make sure that Suitcase gets into the right hands. That's our leverage, Jake. Without it, we're dead. Jake looked down at the suitcase resting on his lap. It felt heavier now, as though it carried more than just money and secrets. Who are the right hands? Can we trust them? Ellie hesitated. Trust is a luxury we don't have. But there's someone I know, a journalist named Randall Briggs. He's been working to expose Apex for years. If anyone can use what's in that suitcase to bring them down, it's him. Why haven't you gone to him before? Jake asked, narrowing his eyes. Ellie's lips pressed into a thin line, because getting to Briggs isn't easy. He's in hiding, constantly moving. Apex wants him just as badly as they want us. Jake slumped back in his seat, the weight of the situation bearing down on him. So, what's the plan? Ellie reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a map, spreading it over the center console. She pointed to a remote area marked with a red circle. We're heading here. It's a safe house I've used before. We'll regroup, go through the suitcase, and figure out our next move. Jake nodded, though doubt gnawed at the edges of his mind. Every step seemed to drag him deeper into danger, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was all spiraling out of control. The drive stretched on, the silence between them broken only by the occasional hum of the car's engine. Jake stared out the window at the darkened landscape, his mind racing with questions he was too afraid to ask. As they neared the safe house, Ellie slowed the car, her eyes scanning the road for any signs of trouble. The safe house was a small, nondescript cabin nestled deep in the woods, its weathered exterior blending seamlessly with the surrounding trees. Ellie parked the car a short distance away and turned to Jake. Stay close to me, and don't let go of that suitcase. Jake nodded, clutching the suitcase as he followed her to the cabin. Ellie unlocked the door with a set of keys she pulled from her jacket, and they stepped inside. The interior was sparse but functional. A single room with a small cot, a table, and a few shelves stocked with canned goods and bottled water. Ellie moved quickly, checking the windows and securing the locks. We should be safe here for a little while, she said, her voice low. Jake set the suitcase on the table, his fingers lingering on the handle. What's really in this thing, Ellie? What's worth all this? Ellie sat across from him, her expression unreadable. Open it. Jake hesitated, then flipped the latches and lifted the lid. The bundles of cash stared back at him. But Ellie reached past them, pulling out a thin, black folder tucked beneath the money. This, she said, holding up the folder. Jake frowned. A folder? That's it. Ellie opened it, revealing a collection of documents, photographs, and what looked like a flash drive. She spread the items across the table, her eyes scanning them with practiced precision. This isn't just a folder, she explained. It's a kill switch. Inside this folder are details of Apex's operations, money laundering, bribery, illegal weapons deals. And this flash drive, it's got names, dates, locations, enough to dismantle their entire network. Jake stared at the evidence, his mind struggling to comprehend the scope of what he was seeing. So, If we give this to Briggs, Apex falls? Ellie nodded. That's the idea. But Apex will do whatever it takes to stop that from happening. That's why we have to be smart. Before Jake could respond, a loud noise shattered the stillness. A faint beep followed by a sharp electronic hum. Ellie's eyes widened. "Get down!" she hissed, shoving Jake to the floor just as the window shattered in a spray of glass. A small device clattered onto the floor, its blinking red light casting an ominous glow. Ellie grabbed it and threw it back out the window just before it detonated, sending a deafening shockwave through the cabin. "They've found us," Ellie muttered, pulling Jake to his feet. "How?" Jake shouted, his ears ringing. Ellie didn't answer. She grabbed the folder, stuffed it back into the suitcase, and shoved it into Jake's hands. "We're leaving. Now." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed outside, accompanied by the low murmur of voices. Ellie pulled her weapon, her movement swift and precise. "Stay behind me," she ordered. Jake followed her toward the back door, his pulse racing. As they stepped outside, a figure emerged from the shadows, blocking their path. Well, the man said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Ellie, you've been a thorn in our side for far too long." Ellie's jaw tightened. "Step aside, Victor." Victor smirked, his sharp features illuminated by the moonlight. "And let you and the kid waltz out of here with my property? I don't think so." "It's over, Victor," Ellie said, her weapon trained on him. "Apex is going down. You can't stop it." Victor chuckled, his hands casually resting at his sides. "Oh, Ellie, you've always been so optimistic. But let's be honest, you and the boy are out of your depth. Now, hand over the suitcase, and I might let you both walk away." Jake's grip on the suitcase tightened. He glanced at Ellie, his fear mounting. "What do we do?" he whispered. Ellie didn't take her eyes off Victor. "Run," she said, her voice barely audible. "What?" "Run, Jake. I'll hold them off. Go." Before Jake could argue, Victor snapped his fingers, and a group of armed men stepped into view. Ellie opened fire, her shots precise and controlled, as Jake bolted into the woods. Branches whipped at his face, the suitcase bumping against his leg as he ran. The shouts and gunfire behind him grew fainter, but the fear driving him forward didn't lessen. He didn't stop until he stumbled upon a dirt road, his chest heaving and his legs threatening to give out. In the distance, he saw headlights approaching, a single car weaving its way through the forest. Jake's heart sank as the car slowed and the driver's door opened. Victor stepped out, his smile as cold as ever. "Game over, kid," he said, raising a weapon. Cliffhanger. Just as Victor pulled the trigger, a blinding light engulfed the road. A helicopter descended from above, its spotlight trained on Victor. Over a loudspeaker, a voice boomed. "Drop the weapon, Victor. You're surrounded." To be continued. The helicopter's spotlight illuminated the dirt road like a blazing sun, casting Victor in sharp relief. His calm, composed demeanor cracked ever so slightly as the booming voice over the loudspeaker ordered him to drop his weapon. "Drop it, Victor," the voice repeated, more forceful this time. Victor glanced at Jake, his icy gaze narrowing. For a moment, Jake was sure Victor would defy the order, but with a sigh, he lowered his weapon and let it clatter onto the dirt. Jake's breath hitched as a group of armed men descended from the helicopter, their tactical gear gleaming in the harsh light. They moved with military precision, weapons trained on Victor and his men as they surrounded them. "Hands in the air," one of the operatives barked. Victor complied, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips. "Took you long enough," he muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Jake staggered back, clutching the suitcase as one of the operatives approached him. A tall man with sharp features and piercing blue eyes knelt down to Jake's level. "You must be Jake," the man said, his voice steady but firm. Jake nodded, still trembling. "Who are you?" The man straightened. "Agent Price. I work with Ellie." Relief flooded Jake's chest at the mention of Ellie's name. Is she okay? She stayed back to fight off Victor's men. She's fine, Price interrupted, his tone reassuring. She radioed us before the attack. We've got her en route to a safe location. Jake sagged against the suitcase, the weight of the night's events catching up with him. Thank God. Price motioned for two operatives to secure Victor and his men. They moved quickly, zip-tying the captives' hands and removing their weapons. You won't hold me for long, Victor sneered, his voice carrying an air of defiance. Apex will come for you. Price didn't flinch. Let them try. He turned back to Jake, his expression softening. We need to get you out of here, kid. You've been through enough for one night. Jake hesitated, his gaze drifting to Victor. Even restrained, the man radiated menace, his eyes locked on Jake with a promise of retribution. Price noticed Jake's unease and rested a hand on his shoulder. You're safe now. Let's move. The helicopter's roar filled Jake's ears as it lifted off, carrying him and Price far from the forest clearing. Jake sat strapped into a seat, the suitcase wedged between his knees. Across from him, Price studied a tablet, his expression grim. What's going to happen to Victor? Jake asked, raising his voice to be heard over the noise. Price glanced up. We'll interrogate him, but Victor's a survivor. He knows how to play the game. Don't expect him to stay locked up for long. Jake's stomach churned. So, what do we do? Price leaned forward, his tone serious. We focus on the bigger picture. That suitcase you're holding, it's the key to taking down Apex. But we need to move fast. They'll stop at nothing to get it back. Jake nodded, though his fingers tightened around the suitcase handle. Ellie said we should give it to a journalist, someone named Briggs. Price's eyes narrowed slightly at the mention of the name. Briggs is a wild card. He's resourceful, but he's reckless. If we hand this over to him, there's no controlling what happens next. Isn't that the point? Jake argued. If this gets out, Apex goes down, right? Price's jaw tightened. It's not that simple. Briggs has a habit of making enemies, and if this blows up the wrong way, it could put you, Ellie, and everyone else in even more danger. Jake frowned, the weight of the decision settling heavily on him. So, what's the plan? Price sighed, glancing at the tablet again. We'll rendezvous with Ellie first, then we'll decide how to proceed. The helicopter landed at a remote airstrip an hour later, the first rays of dawn casting a pale glow over the horizon. A black SUV waited near the edge of the tarmac, its engine idling. As Jake stepped out, Ellie emerged from the vehicle, looking worse for wear. Her jacket was torn, and a faint bruise darkened her cheek, but her expression was as sharp and focused as ever. Jake, she called, relief evident in her voice. Jake ran to her, the suitcase bouncing awkwardly at his side. Ellie, are you okay? I'm fine, she said, brushing off his concern. What about you? Did Victor? Price's team showed up just in time, Jake interrupted. They took him and his men into custody. Ellie's gaze shifted to Price, who was now approaching with a grim expression. And how long do you think they'll stay there? Long enough for us to make a move, Price replied evenly. Ellie crossed her arms. What's the next step? Price gestured to the suitcase. We need to secure the intel. Jake mentioned Briggs, but I already told him that's the plan, Ellie interrupted. Briggs is the only one who can get this out without Apex shutting it down. Price shook his head. Briggs is unpredictable. We'd be handing over the biggest leverage we have to someone we can't control. Ellie stepped closer, her tone sharp. We don't need to control Briggs. We just need him to do his job. Jake watched the exchange, his unease growing. Can we trust him? Ellie turned to Jake, her expression softening. Briggs is risky, but he's on the right side of this fight. If anyone can expose Apex, it's him. Price didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue further. Fine, but we're doing this my way. No unnecessary risks. The drive to the rendezvous point was tense, the atmosphere in the SUV thick with unspoken doubts. Ellie sat in the passenger seat, her fingers tapping a restless rhythm against her thigh. Jake sat in the back, clutching the suitcase and staring out the window as the city skyline came into view. "We're meeting Briggs in a secure location," Price announced, breaking the silence. "Once the transfer is done, you're out, Jake. You'll go into protective custody until this blows over." Jake frowned. "Protective custody? What about my mom? She doesn't even know where I am." Ellie turned in her seat to face him. "We'll make sure she's safe, Jake. But right now, you're the priority. Apex doesn't leave loose ends, and you've painted a big target on your back." Jake slumped back in his seat, the weight of her words settling heavily on him. They arrived at an abandoned office building on the edge of the city, its windows boarded up and graffiti scrawled across the walls. Price led the way inside, his weapon drawn as he cleared each hallway with military precision. Briggs was waiting in a dimly lit room on the second floor, his lanky frame draped in a worn leather jacket. He looked up as they entered, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Ellie," he said, his voice tinged with amusement, "you sure know how to find trouble." Ellie rolled her eyes. "Briggs, this is Jake. He's the one who brought us the suitcase." Briggs' gaze shifted to Jake, his smile widening. "The kid, huh? Heard a lot about you. Brave move, taking this on." Jake shrugged, his unease evident. "Didn't have much of a choice." Briggs chuckled. "Don't worry, you're in good hands now." Price stepped forward, his tone clipped. "Let's get this over with." Briggs' eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't comment. He set up a laptop on the table, motioning for Jake to place the suitcase beside it. Jake hesitated, glancing at Ellie. She gave him a reassuring nod, and he reluctantly handed over the suitcase. Briggs flipped open the lid, his eyes lighting up as he examined the contents. Well, you've got the mother lode here." Before he could say more, the room was flooded with harsh, white light. A low rumble shook the building, followed by the sound of tires screeching outside. Ellie's hand went to her weapon. "We've got company." Cliffhanger. The sound of boots echoed down the hallway, growing louder with each passing second. Ellie turned to Jake, her voice urgent. "Find a way out. Now." Jake barely had time to move before the door burst open, and Victor stepped into the room, a cold smile on his face. "Miss me. To be continued." Victor's smirk was as sharp as the glint of the weapon in his hand. His polished suit was pristine despite the chaos of the past few hours, and his calm demeanor made the tension in the room nearly unbearable. "Miss me?" he repeated, his voice smooth, as if this were a casual reunion and not a life-or-death standoff. Jake froze, his breath catching in his throat. Ellie stepped in front of him, her gun drawn and trained on Victor. "Don't take another step," Ellie warned, her voice steady. Victor chuckled, unfazed. "Relax, Ellie. I'm not here to fight yet, but I think we both know how this ends if you don't hand over what's mine." His eyes flicked to the suitcase on the table, then to Jake. Behind Victor, more armed men filed into the room, their weapons trained on Ellie, Price, and Briggs. The odds were overwhelmingly against them. Briggs raised his hands in mock surrender. "Nice of you to join the party, Victor. But you're a bit late. We're already downloading the files." He gestured toward his laptop, where a progress bar inched forward, transferring the contents of the flash drive. Victor's smile faltered for the briefest moment, his jaw tightening. "Turn it off." Briggs shrugged. "Can't do that. You know how technology is. Once it starts, it's hard to stop." Victor's expression darkened. He motioned to one of his men, who stepped forward and slammed the laptop shut. The screen went black, and the progress bar disappeared. "There," Victor said, his tone icy. "Now we can talk." Ellie took a step forward, her gun still raised. "You're outnumbered, Victor, but I'm willing to bet you're not ready to die for Apex." Victor laughed softly, the sound chilling. "You think this is about loyalty to Apex?" "No, Ellie. This is about survival. You know as well as I do that whoever controls those files controls the game. And I don't lose. Price, standing by the window, shifted slightly, his eyes scanning for an escape route. You've already lost, Victor. Apex is crumbling, whether you like it or not. Victor turned his gaze to Price, his smile returning. Ah, Agent Price, always the optimist. Tell me, how many people have you sacrificed for your so-called justice? How many lives are you willing to ruin for a chance to bring us down? Jake's stomach churned. He glanced between Ellie, Price, and Victor, unsure who to believe. The lines between hero and villain were blurring, and the weight of the suitcase on the table felt heavier than ever. Enough of this, Victor said, snapping his fingers. Two of his men stepped forward, weapons drawn. Hand over the suitcase, or I start shooting. Ellie tightened her grip on her gun. If you fire one shot, this entire place will light up. You're standing in a building rigged with alarms, and reinforcements are less than 5 minutes away. Victor's smile faltered again, but he didn't lower his weapon. Instead, he turned his attention to Jake, his voice softening. Jake, he said, taking a step closer, you're the only one who can stop this. These people don't care about you. They're using you just like everyone else. But I can protect you and your mother. Jake flinched at the mention of his mom. What are you talking about? Victor's eyes glinted with calculated kindness. Apex has resources you can't even imagine. You want your mom safe? I can make that happen. A new home, new identity, financial security, you name it. All you have to do is hand me the suitcase. Ellie shot Victor a glare. Don't listen to him, Jake. He's lying. Victor ignored her, his gaze locked on Jake. Think about it, kid. These so-called heroes will ditch you the moment you're no longer useful. But I can give you and your mom a way out permanently. Jake's hands clenched into fists. The temptation of Victor's offer was overwhelming, but a nagging voice in the back of his mind told him not to trust it. He looked to Ellie, then to Price, and finally to Briggs. What happens if we give him the files? Jake asked, his voice shaky. Ellie answered immediately. Apex continues operating in the shadows. Nothing changes. More people get hurt. Victor smirked. And if you give it to Briggs, he'll plaster it all over the internet, turning you into a target for every criminal Apex has ever worked with. Your mom won't last a week. Jake's chest tightened. The room felt suffocating. The weight of the decision pressing down on him like a vice. Time's up, Victor said, his tone sharp. He extended his hand. What's it going to be, Jake? The room fell silent, every eye on Jake. His heart raced as he reached for the suitcase, his fingers trembling. Ellie stepped closer, her voice urgent. Jake, don't. Before she could finish, Jake threw the suitcase to the ground, the latches popping open. The folder and flash drive spilled out, scattering across the floor. What the hell are you doing? Ellie shouted. Victor's men moved to grab the files, but Jake acted faster. He scooped up the flash drive and bolted for the door. Get him. Victor barked. Chaos erupted. Ellie fired her gun, taking down two of Victor's men as Jake sprinted down the hallway. Briggs followed close behind, his laptop under one arm. Kid, what's your plan? Briggs called, his voice strained. I don't know. Jake shouted back. Just keep running. They burst into a stairwell, the sound of footsteps echoing as they descended. The faint whir of an elevator somewhere in the building told Jake that Victor's men were in pursuit. As they reached the ground floor, Jake skidded to a stop. A group of armed operatives blocked the exit, their weapons trained on him. Freeze, one of them barked. Briggs cursed under his breath. We're trapped. Jake's mind raced. The flash drive felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket, and the weight of the decision he'd made crushed him. Behind them, Ellie and Price emerged from the stairwell, guns drawn. Ellie's face was a mask of frustration and determination. We need a distraction, she said, glancing around. Jake spotted a fire alarm near the exit and bolted for it. Ignoring the shouts from the operatives, he pulled the lever, and a deafening alarm blared through the building. Red strobe lights flashed as the sprinkler system activated, soaking everyone. In the chaos, Jake slipped through the crowd, Ellie and the others following close behind. Outside, the cool night air hit Jake's face as he stumbled into the street. Sirens wailed in the distance, signaling the arrival of backup. Ellie grabbed Jake's arm, forcing him to face her. "What the hell was that? You nearly got us killed." Jake pulled away, his voice cracking. "I didn't know what else to do. Victor's right. I don't know who to trust." Ellie's expression softened, but her voice remained firm. "You can trust me. We're in this together." Before Jake could respond, the screech of tires drew their attention. A black SUV sped toward them, its headlights cutting through the chaos. The passenger window rolled down, and Victor leaned out, his cold smile returning. "This isn't over, kid," he called as the SUV skidded to a stop. His men jumped out, weapons at the ready. Jake's heart sank. The game wasn't just dangerous, it was far from over. Victor stepped forward, raising a hand. "You have one last chance, Jake. Give me the drive, or say goodbye to your freedom and your family." To be continued. The night air crackled with tension as Victor stood in the glow of the SUV's headlights, his hand raised in a mockery of patience. Around him, armed men closed in, their weapons trained on Jake, Ellie, Price, and Briggs. Jake's heart pounded as Victor's cold smile pierced through the chaos. "One last chance, kid," Victor repeated, his voice calm but laced with menace. "Hand over the flash drive, and this all ends peacefully. For you, for your mom, for everyone." Ellie stepped forward, her gun trained on Victor. Her voice was sharp and unwavering. "Jake, don't listen to him. He'll say whatever it takes to get what he wants." Victor chuckled, his eyes glinting with amusement. "And you wouldn't do the same, Ellie? The kid's been a pawn since the moment you pulled him into this mess." Jake's stomach churned as the weight of Victor's words sank in. He glanced at Ellie, searching her face for reassurance, but her tight expression told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't a game, it was a battlefield, and he was standing in the middle of it. "You're running out of time," Victor said, his voice cutting through Jake's thoughts. He gestured to his men, who took a step closer, their weapons clicking into position. Ellie's hand twitched on the trigger. "Back off, Victor." Victor raised an eyebrow, his smirk never faltering. "Go ahead, Ellie. Start a firefight in the middle of a city street. Let's see how that works out for your little team." Jake's pulse raced as he clutched the flash drive in his pocket. His mind churned with conflicting thoughts. Handing it over might save his mom, but it would also let Apex continue their reign of terror. Holding on to it meant fighting back, but at what cost? "Jake," Ellie said, her voice breaking through his haze. "We can't let him win. Whatever happens, we stick together." Victor's smile faded, replaced by a sharp glare. "Enough of this. Take them." The moment shattered. Victor's men surged forward, their boots pounding against the pavement. Ellie fired first, her shot echoing like a thunderclap. Price followed, his movements precise as he provided cover. "Run!" Ellie shouted at Jake, her voice barely audible over the gunfire. Jake bolted down the street, the flash drive burning in his pocket like a live coal. Behind him, Briggs stumbled, nearly dropping his laptop as he scrambled to keep up. "Kid, what's the plan?" Briggs shouted, his voice strained. Jake didn't answer. He didn't have a plan. He just ran, his legs pumping as adrenaline coursed through his veins. The suitcase was gone, left behind in the chaos, but the flash drive, the key to everything, was still with him. Ahead, an alley opened up like a shadowy maw, offering a sliver of hope. Jake veered toward it, his breath ragged. Briggs followed, cursing under his breath as they plunged into the darkness. The alley was a maze of dumpsters, fire escapes, and puddles that glistened under the dim glow of a single streetlight. Jake skidded to a stop, his chest heaving as he scanned for an escape route. "They're right behind us," Briggs hissed, clutching his laptop to his chest. Jake's eyes landed on a ladder bolted to the side of a building. Without hesitation, he grabbed the rungs and began to climb, his fingers slipping on the slick metal. "Hurry!" Briggs shouted, scrambling up after him. Gunfire erupted behind them, the sharp cracks reverberating off the walls. Jake didn't dare look down. He climbed faster, his muscles burning as he hauled himself onto the rooftop. The city stretched out before him, a labyrinth of lights and shadows. He turned to help Briggs, who was struggling to pull himself over the edge. "Got it," Briggs panted, collapsing onto the rooftop. "Now what?" Jake didn't answer. He crouched low, peering over the edge of the building. Below, Victor's men swarmed the alley, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. "They won't stop," Jake muttered, his voice shaking. Briggs sat up, his face pale. "No, they won't. So, unless you've got a magic escape plan, we're screwed." Jake's mind raced. Ellie and Price were still fighting, trying to buy them time, but he knew it wouldn't last. Apex had the numbers, the resources, the upper hand. He pulled the flash drive from his pocket, staring at the tiny device that had caused so much chaos. "This thing," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's the only thing keeping us alive." Briggs raised an eyebrow. "And it's the only thing they want. So, what are you thinking?" Jake's grip tightened on the flash drive. "I'm thinking we need leverage, something they can't ignore." Briggs frowned. "Like what?" Jake didn't answer. He stood, his eyes scanning the rooftops for an idea, a direction, anything. His gaze landed on a cell tower in the distance, its red light blinking like a beacon. "There," he said, pointing. Briggs followed his gaze, his eyes widening. "You're kidding. That's a signal tower. You want to upload the files directly to the internet." Jake nodded, his jaw set. "If Apex wants to bury this, we make it impossible for them to hide. We put it everywhere." Briggs hesitated. "That's risky, kid. Once it's out there, there's no going back." Jake's voice hardened. "There's no going back anyway." The journey to the tower was a desperate scramble across rooftops and fire escapes, each step fraught with danger. Victor's men were relentless, their flashlights and voices echoing in the streets below. As Jake and Briggs neared the tower, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Jake's chest tightened as he spotted a group of men climbing the fire escape behind them. "They're gaining!" Briggs shouted, his voice laced with panic. Jake pushed forward, his legs screaming in protest. The tower loomed ahead, its base surrounded by a chain-link fence. "We'll never make it," Briggs said, gasping for breath. "Yes, we will," Jake snapped, his determination overriding his fear. They reached the fence and Jake fumbled with the lock, his hands trembling. Briggs handed him a multi-tool from his bag, and Jake worked quickly, the lock finally clicking open. They slipped through and bolted for the tower. Briggs began climbing first, the laptop slung over his shoulder. Jake followed, the flash drive clenched in his fist. Gunfire erupted below, bullets pinging off the metal structure. Jake didn't look down. He climbed higher, his lungs burning, his mind focused on the goal. Briggs reached the top and set up the laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Plug it in," he shouted. Jake handed him the flash drive, his heart pounding as Briggs inserted it into the port. The laptop screen lit up, the files transferring in a blur of progress bars and data streams. Below, Victor's men reached the base of the tower, their shouts echoing up the structure. "They're coming," Jake shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Briggs grinned, a manic glint in his eyes. "Doesn't matter. Once this hits the cloud, it's over for Apex." The final progress bar inched forward, the tension unbearable. "Come on," Jake whispered, his eyes locked on the screen. As the bar hit 100%, a notification appeared. "Upload complete." Briggs let out a triumphant laugh. We did it. Jake's relief was short-lived. A deafening clang echoed through the tower as Victor climbed into view, his gun aimed directly at them. "Step away from the laptop," Victor growled. "Cliffhanger." Jake stood frozen, his body trembling as Victor's finger hovered over the trigger. The glow of the uploaded files reflected in Victor's cold eyes. "Let's see how brave you are now," Victor said, his voice dripping with menace. To be continued. The cold barrel of Victor's gun gleamed in the moonlight, pointed squarely at Jake's chest. The triumph Jake had felt only moments ago, as the upload hit 100%, was now replaced by a suffocating dread. The glow of the laptop screen illuminated Briggs' frozen expression, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, as if they could still undo what had just been done. "You've made a grave mistake," Victor said, his voice unervingly calm. His eyes flicked to the laptop, then back to Jake. "You think uploading those files will stop me? Apex will clean this up before the public even knows what hit them." Jake's jaw tightened, sweat slicking his palms. "Maybe, but now everyone will know what you've done. No more hiding in the shadows." Victor's smirk wavered for a moment, his icy gaze narrowing. He took a step closer, his weapon steady. Brave words for someone standing on the edge of oblivion. Jake glanced down. The platform beneath his feet felt perilously small, the wind whipping around them like a warning. The cell tower swayed slightly, and the dizzying height made his head spin. Ellie's voice crackled through Jake's earpiece, startling him. "Jake, what's happening? Talk to me." "Victor's here," Jake whispered, trying to keep his voice steady. "He's got us cornered." Ellie cursed on the other end. "Hold tight. We're coming." Victor's brow furrowed as he noticed Jake's earpiece. "You're stalling." He motioned to one of his men, climbing behind him on the tower. "Kill the signal and destroy the laptop." The man climbed higher, his movements methodical. Jake's stomach churned as he realized he had seconds to act. "Don't do this, Victor," Jake said, his voice trembling. "If you destroy that laptop, you'll just make it worse. The files are already out there." Victor chuckled darkly. "And what do you think happens next? Apex has contingencies, Jake. By the time this reaches the public, we'll have spun it into nothing more than a conspiracy theory. But you and your friends, you won't live to see it." Jake's mind raced. He needed to buy more time, but the cold, calculated menace in Victor's eyes told him there was no reasoning with the man. "You don't have to do this," Jake said, his voice rising in desperation. Victor raised an eyebrow, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Oh, but I do." Ellie and Price raced through the city streets below, the SUV's tires screeching as they rounded a corner. Ellie's jaw was set in grim determination, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. "What's the situation?" Price asked, his weapon ready in his lap. "Victor's on the tower," Ellie replied, her voice clipped. "Jake and Briggs are trapped. If we don't get there fast, they're dead." Price nodded. "We'll need to distract him long enough to pull them out. Can you take the shot if it comes to it?" Ellie didn't hesitate. "I won't let Victor win. Not this time." On the tower, Victor's man reached the laptop, his hands poised to destroy it. Briggs lunged forward in a desperate attempt to stop him, but Victor's sharp voice froze him in place. "Move and you die," Victor snapped. Briggs hesitated, his face pale. "You think killing me will solve your problems? The files are already uploaded. It's over for you." Victor sneered. "I'm not trying to solve the problem. I'm eliminating the loose ends." The man raised his fist, ready to smash the laptop. Jake's mind screamed for a solution, his heart hammering in his chest. Then he remembered the emergency backup flash drive Briggs had tucked into his jacket earlier. "If I distract him," Jake thought, his resolve hardening. "Wait!" Jake shouted, stepping forward. Victor's gun snapped to Jake, the movement almost reflexive. "Bold move, kid. You have something to say before the end." Jake nodded, forcing himself to meet Victor's gaze. "You're wrong. Apex won't clean this up. The files are already out there, and people will demand answers. You can't stop all of them. Victor tilted his head, amused. Cute speech, but words won't save you. Behind Victor, Ellie's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. Drop the gun, Victor. Victor turned just as Ellie fired a warning shot, the bullet sparking off the tower's metal frame. The distraction was enough. Jake lunged for the man near the laptop, grabbing his arm and yanking him backward. The laptop wobbled precariously on the edge of the platform, and Briggs scrambled to catch it before it fell. Victor roared in anger, firing wildly at Ellie's position below. She ducked behind a support beam, returning fire with precision. "Jake, move," Ellie shouted. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed the backup flash drive from Briggs and slid it into his pocket. "We've got to get out of here." Briggs nodded, his face pale as he clutched the laptop. Together, they scrambled down the tower as bullets ricocheted around them. On the ground, Price provided cover fire, his shots precise as he picked off Victor's men one by one. Ellie emerged from her cover, sprinting toward the base of the tower. "Jake, jump," she called, her voice carrying over the chaos. Jake hesitated, his legs trembling as he looked at the remaining distance to the ground. But when Victor's voice roared behind him, he didn't think twice. He leaped, the wind rushing past him as Ellie caught him mid-fall, cushioning the impact. "You okay?" she asked, her voice breathless. Jake nodded, his chest heaving. "We need to go. Now." Briggs hit the ground seconds later, the laptop clutched to his chest. Price motioned for them to follow as he fired another round at the tower, forcing Victor to retreat. They piled into the SUV, the engine roaring to life as Ellie hit the gas. Tires screeched as they sped away, leaving the tower and Victor's enraged shouts behind. In the back seat, Jake clutched the flash drive, his hands trembling. He met Ellie's gaze in the rearview mirror. "Did we win?" Ellie's expression was grim. "Not yet. Victor won't stop, and Apex is still out there. But we've got the files. We've got a chance." Briggs exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "A chance? That's all we've had from the start." Jake leaned back, his heart still racing. The weight of the flash drive in his pocket felt heavier than ever. "Whatever happens," Jake said quietly, "we can't let them win." Ellie nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. "We won't." Miles away, Victor stood in the shadow of the damaged tower, his face twisted with rage. His phone buzzed, and he answered with a sharp, "What?" A smooth voice replied on the other end. "Did you recover the files?" Victor's jaw tightened. "No, but I will." The voice on the other end chuckled darkly. "You'd better. Failure is not an option." Victor's grip on the phone tightened, his gaze fixed on the distant city lights. "They think they've won, but this isn't over." To be continued. The SUV sped down the darkened highway, its headlights slicing through the early morning haze. Inside, the tension was palpable. Ellie gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled focus, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror. Briggs was slumped in the back seat, clutching his battered laptop, while Jake sat beside him, the flash drive still clutched tightly in his hand. "We can't keep running," Jake said, breaking the silence. His voice was hoarse, the exhaustion of the past few days weighing heavily on him. Ellie glanced at him through the mirror, her jaw tight. "We're not running. We're regrouping." Jake shook his head. "No, Victor's not going to stop. Apex won't stop. They're going to keep coming after us until they've wiped us out." "And what do you suggest?" Briggs asked, his tone biting. "March into their headquarters and demand they stop." "No," Jake said, his gaze hardening. "We hit them where it hurts. We take Apex down for good." Ellie raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do you propose we do that?" Victor glared at Ellie, his eyes burning with hatred. "You think you've won? This isn't the end." Ellie leveled her weapon. "For you it is." Jake leaned forward, his voice gaining strength. "The files are out there, right? But that's just the beginning. If we want to bring Apex down, we need to expose them on every level. Their leaders, their operations, their networks. We need to make them so toxic that no one will touch them. Briggs let out a dry laugh. That's ambitious, kid, but it's not that simple. Apex has been bearing its tracks for decades. They've got allies everywhere. Politicians, corporations, even law enforcement. Jake turned to Ellie. You said Apex has a central hub, right? A place where they store their most sensitive data. Ellie hesitated, her expression unreadable. It's not just a hub, it's a fortress. State-of-the-art security, armed guards, constant surveillance. Breaking into that place is a suicide mission. Jake's gaze didn't waver. Then we make it their problem. We use the files we already have to create chaos, draw their resources away, and while they're distracted, we get inside and finish this. Price, seated in the front passenger seat, finally spoke. It's risky, reckless, even, but it might be our only shot. Ellie frowned, but after a long pause, she nodded. If we're doing this, we need to move fast. Victor's already regrouping, and Apex will lock down their headquarters the moment they sense a threat. Then let's do it, Jake said, his voice steady. The group spent the next few hours planning, their movements careful as they avoided Apex's ever-present eyes. Using Briggs' laptop, they coordinated with a small network of allies, whistleblowers, journalists, and hackers, all of whom had their own reasons for wanting Apex destroyed. Briggs orchestrated a digital blitz, leaking the initial files and bursts to news outlets and social media platforms. Within minutes, the internet was ablaze with damning headlines and speculation. Apex was in damage control, scrambling to suppress the fallout. They're pulling resources back to HQ, Briggs said, watching the chaos unfold on his screen. Just like we planned. Ellie checked her weapon, her expression grim. This is it. Once we're in, there's no turning back. Jake nodded, his determination unwavering. Good. Let's end this. The Apex headquarters loomed ahead like a monolith of glass and steel, its sharp lines cutting into the night sky. The building pulsed with a faint, eerie glow, its security measures as intimidating as its structure. Ellie parked the SUV a block away, the group slipping out and moving silently through the shadows. Price led the way, his movements calculated as he bypassed perimeter sensors and motion detectors. This way, he whispered, guiding them to a service entrance. Briggs hacked into the keypad, his fingers flying across the small device. After a tense moment, the door clicked open and they slipped inside. The interior of the building was sleek and sterile, its corridors eerily silent. Ellie motioned for the group to spread out, her weapon at the ready. The server room is 2 floors up, she said quietly. Once we're there, Briggs can plug in the drive and extract the rest of their data. We'll upload it in real time to every major outlet we've got on standby. Jake's heart raced as they moved through the building, the tension growing with every step. Each shadow felt like a threat, each sound like a harbinger of danger. As they reached the stairwell, Briggs' voice broke the silence. Wait, we've got company. Ellie froze, her gaze snapping to the hallway ahead. The faint sound of boots echoed toward them, growing louder by the second. They're sweeping the building, Price muttered. We need to move, now. The server room was a sprawling space filled with rows of blinking machines, their hum filling the air. Briggs hurried to the nearest console, plugging in the flash drive as the rest of the group formed a defensive perimeter. I'm in, Briggs said, his voice tight with concentration. But this is going to take time. They've got layers of encryption. Work fast, Ellie ordered, her eyes scanning the doorway. Jake stood beside her, his hands shaking. What happens if they get to us before the upload finishes? Ellie's expression didn't waver. We hold them off, no matter what. The sound of footsteps grew louder, followed by sharp, clipped voices. Ellie motioned for everyone to take cover as Victor's men flooded into the room, their weapons raised. It's over. Victor's voice rang out, cold and commanding. He stepped into view, his smirk as sharp as ever. Ellie stepped forward, her gun trained on him. "Not yet, Victor." Victor laughed, the sound echoing through the room. "You really think you can win this? Even if you get those files out, Apex will survive. We always do." Jake's voice cut through the tension. "Not this time." Victor's gaze snapped to Jake, his smirk fading. "You don't understand the game, kid. You're just a pawn." "Maybe," Jake said, his voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside him. "But sometimes, pawns take down kings." Ellie opened fire, and chaos erupted. Bullets flew, the server room erupting into a storm of gunfire and sparks. Ellie and Price held their ground, their shots precise as they fought to keep Victor's men at bay. Briggs worked furiously at the console, sweat dripping down his face. "Almost there," he shouted. Jake crouched behind a server rack, clutching a makeshift weapon he'd grabbed, a wrench left behind by maintenance. His heart pounded as he watched the battle unfold, the stakes higher than ever. Victor moved with cold precision, firing with deadly accuracy as he advanced toward Briggs. Jake's chest tightened as he saw Briggs stumble, nearly losing his grip on the laptop. Without thinking, Jake sprang into action. He charged toward Victor, his wrench swinging. Victor turned just in time to block the blow, his expression twisting into a snarl. "You've got guts, kid. I'll give you that." Jake gritted his teeth, his muscles burning as he fought to hold his ground. "I'm not letting you win." Victor shoved Jake back, his strength overwhelming. Jake hit the floor hard, his vision swimming. "Jake, get up," Ellie shouted, firing at Victor's man. Jake forced himself to his feet, adrenaline pushing him forward. He grabbed the wrench again, ready to charge. Briggs' voice rang out above the chaos. "It's done. The files are live." Victor froze, his expression turning to fury. "No!" Ellie took the opening, her shot grazing Victor's arm. He stumbled, dropping his weapon. "It's over, Victor," she said, her voice firm. Victor's men hesitated, their resolve faltering as the sound of sirens filled the air. Apex's fortress was crumbling, and they knew it. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Share your thoughts in the comments and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next thrilling episode. See you in our next video. Take care.